South Africa is hoping to get some shipments of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine by the end of the week. Their vaccination drive is facing a sudden shortfall after the AstraZeneca rollout went on hold because of troubling new data. The vaccine initiative, COVAX, has put most of its chips on Johnson & Johnson, purchasing 500 million doses. But they have considerable stake in AstraZeneca as well, with 170 million doses on order. That means that any limitations in protection would impact the less wealthy countries COVAX is working to vaccinate. The CEO of Oxfam, Great Britain, Danny Sriskandarajah, joins us live now from London. Danny, thank you so much for being with us. So just the fact that, you know, there's been this troubling new data on this South African variant and the fact that it might not, the AstraZeneca vaccine might not be as effective against it. Where does South Africa go from here, do you think?
Well, I think what happens in South Africa is going to be of huge importance to the rest of the world, particularly poorer, because, as you said, the AstraZeneca vaccine is one of the few that is going to be widely available to poorer countries. In fact, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are the only two major pharmaceutical companies that have made an open commitment to supplying vaccines at cost. And so while it's right for the authorities to take care about judging the efficacy of vaccines, it will be hugely disappointing that one of the two viable options for developing countries at this time when we're seeing vaccine apartheid is not going to be widely available. So it really is worrying both for South Africa and the rest of the developed.
So South Africa has said, you know what, we are going to pause the AstraZeneca vaccine. I mean, obviously the data, there's so much that's unknown. We know that it doesn't necessarily work against sort of mild and moderate sort of symptoms for COVID-19 with this new variant. It's a bit iffy about how protective this vaccine is against more severe cases. But South Africa just basically said, listen, we are going to put distributing the vaccine on hold. We're going to put a pause on it until we discover more data and we learn more about the efficacy of AstraZeneca. Is that the right response? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I think it's exactly right to test this. I think expecting these sort of hiccups or holdbacks in what has effectively been, you know, an amazing, startling, remarkable process of designing, creating and rolling out these vaccines. But, you know, the real issue for me, the real tragedy in some ways, is that, you know, we're facing such a crisis as humanity, and yet we're depending on a few pharmaceutical companies who are acting almost like an oligopoly to help, you know, make decisions about where and how this vaccine should be distributed. I think, you know, it's deeply unfair for me that, you know, rich countries have so far secured something like 3 times their population's worth of vaccines, while in poorer countries, by the end of the year, we're expecting only 1 in 10 people will have access to a vaccine. And, you know, if we're going to crack this pandemic as a world population, then we need a far better strategy for sharing technology, sharing the science, for pooling our resources and know-how so that we can roll out vaccines far more effectively than we're currently able to do.
I mean, you bring up a good point. Africa, a continent with a population of 1 billion people, completely dependent, at the mercy of 2 pharmaceutical companies, and now basically 1 pharmaceutical company, because a lot of people are hesitant about AstraZeneca. So yes, you know, Europe and the United States have a lot more vaccine doses than they perhaps need. But what is the solution here? How do you make things much more equitable and fair between the rich and the poor?
I think the solution's already out there. The World Health Organization has some common protocols for accessing technology and sharing technology, for creating pooled distribution mechanisms. So far, very few of the big pharmaceutical companies have been showing willing to contribute. I think a second key is much greater transparency. You know, we're dealing with a vaccine where almost every single dose is being purchased by governments acting in the public interest or international agencies. And yet the whole process is shrouded by secrecy, by contracts that we can't see. And of course, the last thing we need is much greater public awareness about to push big pharmaceutical companies to move. Yes, they're doing a fantastic job. But for me, the true heroes in this piece are the taxpayers like you and me, Zain, who have paid billions of dollars to contribute to the science and the development of these vaccines. And yet, where short-term shareholder interest is holding long-term public good to ransom. And we have to build public pressure on these big pharmaceutical companies to move on their position.
Right, so public awareness, public pressure on these pharmaceutical companies, and of course, transparency is key in all of this. Danny, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it.